Hello, my name is Murray Stein, and I'm lecturing from Switzerland today. I'm happy to be with you in this format. I would prefer to be with you in Brazil, but due to Corona and my age and other factors, this is what's possible, and I'm happy that we can meet in this fashion at any rate. And what I'm going to offer you today is a talk on the dream in Jungian psychoanalysis, on practicing or working with dreams in the practice of analysis. So my focus will be on this topic of what do we do with dreams in Jungian psychoanalysis. So could we have the next slide, please? This lecture actually belongs to a larger context. I wrote a book called The Four Pillars of Jungian Psychoanalysis, and working with dreams is one of the chapters in that book. The four pillars that I write about are, first of all, the individuation process as the goal of Jungian psychoanalysis. We work toward individuation with our clients, toward their individuation, toward their development and growth. And the second pillar is the therapeutic relationship. This is the container in which that process takes place. The process of analysis is a piece of a lifelong developmental journey that the patient is a part of and is undergoing at the time of the analysis. So what the analyst has is a slice of the client's life, maybe however many sessions, a year or two or longer. And in that period of time, a relationship, a strong and complex relationship develops between the analyst and the client. And that is the means of the therapeutic process and the container for it. The individuation process is promoted by the analytic work within the context of the therapeutic relationship. And then in Jungian analysis, we work extensively with dreams. That will be my topic for today. And also with active imagination. That's the fourth pillar. So I'm going to talk exclusively about dream interpretation and working with dreams in the context of Jungian analysis. So if we could have the next slide, please. I want to give a little background on Jung and dreams. Jung had a lifelong interest in dreams, at first simply as a child and a young man, and then as a professional, as a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, and also as a psychological theorist. So Jung's interest in dreams and his fascination with dreams begins early in his childhood, and he records his early dreams in his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections. The first dream that he recalls is from the age of 3 or 4, and it's the famous underground phallus dream, where he goes into an underground room and he sees a gigantic phallus sitting on a throne, and his mother calls out, "That is the man-eater." And Jung wakes up in terror and reflects on that dream for the rest of his life. He says that it introduced him to the mysteries of the unconscious, of the underworld. It was his first entry, his first glimpse into the underworld. And that dream has been interpreted by many people writing about Jung in the biographies and studies of Jung's work. I won't comment any further on it. The Memories, Dreams, Reflections, though, contains quite a large number of dreams from Jung's early years. So my point here is to say that Jung's interest in dreams and fascination with dreams was lifelong. It began at the beginning of his life as a child, and it continued throughout his life. And then when he went to study psychiatry in Zurich at the Berkholzli Clinic in 1900, he was given an assignment by his teacher, Eugen Bleuler, to review a book that had just been published that year. And that was Freud's famous interpretation of dreams. And Jung read that book with great interest and found it absolutely fascinating that a Viennese doctor would take such an interest in dreams and interpreting dreams in relation to his analytic work, his psychoanalytic work. Freud was the founder of psychoanalysis and had been practicing psychoanalysis with his patients for about 10 years when he wrote that book. And Jung picked it up and found great interest because it spoke about dreams in a very unusual way, in a psychological way. Dreams not as messages from the other world or from God, or dreams as simply neurological activity in the night that's meaningless, but dreams as having a psychological meaning. And Freud has a very interesting theory of dream interpretation that he puts forward in that book. Jung learned that, and he went to visit Freud in Vienna and became a Freudian psychoanalyst, working with patients in the clinic who were suitable candidates for analysis and using Freud's methods. And a part of that certainly was interpreting the patient's dreams. And what Jung learned from Freud was something about the dreams are an expression of the unconscious. Freud said the dream is the royal road to the unconscious. So if you want to get into the unconscious, behind the scenes of conscious life, the way to do it is to look at dreams. And so this gave Jung an idea for how to approach the unconscious. At the same time, he was using the word association experiment in his research in the clinic, and that also gave him access to the unconscious by asking for the free associations of test subjects to stimulus words. And he created his theory of complexes using the results of his research in word association experiment. But then discovering Freud's work and using Freud's work, he saw that dreams could take him even further into the unconscious than the associations that he got in the word association experiment. And then in 1909, Jung took a trip to the United States with Freud, where they both received an honorary degree from Clark University in Massachusetts. And they spent quite a lot of time together on board ship, sailing from Hamburg, Germany to New York, and then back again from New York to Hamburg. And on board ship, they exchanged dreams with one another. They'd wake up in the morning and meet for breakfast, and then they would talk about the dreams they had in the night. And during that trip, Jung had a very important dream that he writes about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections in the chapter on Freud, in which he's in a house. And the house has a ground floor and several basements. And the ground floor is decorated in the contemporary fashion. Its furniture looks like the furniture in Jung's house at that time. And then he goes to a basement, a first basement, and that looks like a much older level of the house where the furniture resembles something from a couple of centuries earlier. And then he goes to a still deeper basement, and that's even more ancient. That goes back to classical times to Roman times. And then finally, there's a tiny opening in the floor, and Jung opens it and looks down and descends to the sub-basement. And there he finds the bones of prehistoric people. And this dream, which Jung told to Freud, but didn't appreciate Freud's interpretation of it, Jung felt that he could use this dream to create a theory of the unconscious, namely that the unconscious has levels, that there is a very personal level that would be your everyday life, what you experience in everyday life and you dream about during the night, and then a deeper level where you might go back into your early family history or into your parents' history or your nation's history. You dream some dreams from a cultural level, cultural unconscious level. And then still deeper, you get into the archetypal level, what he would call the collective unconscious, which goes all the way back to the earliest times of human history. And the collective unconscious reaches down to the very beginnings of human history and even earlier. So Jung found this dream very useful for thinking about psychology theoretically. So you can see how he would use a dream even for making theory. And then he worked with dreams in psychoanalysis. And increasingly, Jung worked on a psychoanalytic level at the Berkeley Clinic, where he practiced psychiatry. It was with very disturbed patients who were often custodial and lived in the clinic for many years, their whole lifetime practically. And there wasn't so much work one could do with them on a psychological level, although Jung did ask for their dreams and was interested in hearing about their history and so on. But when he set up his private practice at home, in his home in Küsnacht, after about 1910, patients started coming to him from other countries, from the United States, from England, because he had become quite famous as a leader in the psychoanalytic movement. He was the first president of the International Psychoanalytic Association, the IPA. And he made a very big name for himself internationally by giving lectures, traveling widely, publishing a lot of articles and books. And so patients began coming to him from abroad. And these were people who had some mental illness, but of a mild sort. They were not hospital patients, and they didn't need to be hospitalized, but they were probably somewhat neurotically handicapped. One would maybe give an anxiety neurosis or depression neurosis or obsessive compulsive neurosis or narcissistic or borderline features, that sort of thing that we would use today to make a diagnosis. But they came into analysis to work on their problems and to grow and to become more whole personalities. And these were the patients that Jung worked with for the rest of his life. And they often became his students. Some of them became analysts. They went back to their countries of origin and began working as analysts in England and the United States, Germany, Israel. Erich Neumann went to Israel. And then the Jung Institute was created in the 1940s, and Jung students started teaching the practice of Jungian psychoanalysis to students from many different countries. Carlos Byington from Brazil came to Zurich in the 1950s, I believe, and studied at the Jung Institute. I think he probably met Jung at the time. And all of the students who came to study analysis and becoming analysts would learn how to use, how to work with dreams in the practice of analysis. So working with dreams in analysis became a standard feature of Jungian practice and continues to be so to this day. Jungians are known for their interest in dreams and their ability to work effectively with dreams on a psychological level. And then finally, Jung's last piece of writing, which he didn't even complete quite, but he wrote the most of it in the last year of his life, titled Symbols and the Interpretation of Dreams. So to the end of his life, he was working on the topic of dreams. And you can read that paper of his in Collected Works 18. So you can see dreams occupied Jung for the entire course of his lifetime. And he has a lot to say about dreams in his collective writings and his interviews and letters and so on. He was a specialist in dream interpretation, like the biblical Joseph, who could interpret the Pharaoh's dreams. Jung was very good at interpreting people's dreams. Could we have the next slide, please? Now, I'm going to walk you through the process of working with dreams in analysis, and I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 steps and then different types of dreams. So step 1 that I'd like to introduce you to is receiving dreams in analysis. How does this happen? Now, some clients, if they know that you're a Jungian analyst, and Jungian analysts are famous for working with dreams, are known for that, some clients will right off from the first session bring you dreams and continue to bring you dreams throughout their analysis. But other clients come to you and they don't really have any idea what's the difference between a Jungian, a Freudian, other types of psychotherapists. They're simply coming because they have a problem, a relationship problem or a mental problem of some kind, a compulsion disorder, or problems with anger or whatever. And so the Jungian analyst will invite those clients as well to bring dreams into the psychotherapeutic work, even if it's short-term work. And Jungian analysts do sometimes engage in short-term psychotherapy and supportive psychotherapy. But no matter what type of psychotherapy they're practicing, they will invite dreams. They will tell the client in the first session, if you have a dream while we're working together, or a dream that you remember from earlier in your life, bring it and we'll take a look at it and see if it can offer us some important information about your psyche, about your unconscious. So the first step is to ask for dreams, and then to show an interest in dreams. When a dream is brought into the therapeutic vessel, into the session, to show a particular interest in it. That means to pay careful attention to it. And I will take you through the steps of what we do to pay attention to the dream. And this showing of interest in dreams on the part of the therapist is a clear signal to the client that dreams are important. The analyst doesn't have to say very much about that. Simply by showing a particular interest and fascination with their dreams and discussing the dreams, taking time with the dreams, looking carefully at them with the client, signals the client this is something important. And especially if the client begins getting benefit from looking at the dreams, it increases the dynamic and the interest in working with dreams. So this reception of dreams is very important, to give it a place in the sessions. And then there's a question of, should the dream be spoken or read? Now, typically, people will make some notes of their dreams, otherwise they forget their dreams. And the analyst might say, if you have a hard time remembering your dreams in the morning, make a few notes when you wake up to remind you of what the dream was. And you might even write it out, write the dream out as a text. If you like, you can bring me a copy of the text and we can go over it together. But you can bring some notes to remind you, or you can just tell me the dream if you remember it. Either a spoken or a read dream is fine. If somebody reads a written down dream to me, I ask them to elaborate on it if they remember some further details as they're reading the dream, to tell me about that as well. And then there's also the matter of clarifying details in the dream that I will ask if it's not clear when they report the dream. Who was that person sitting beside you, or that person you ran into on the street? What kind of clothes were you wearing that day, if that's important? Or whose house was that? Or what kind of car was that you were driving in? Just to bring the details of the dream into focus as much as possible. By giving it more detail with the sensate function, we're using the sensate function now, thinking typologically, you make the dream more vivid and alive and colorful. And so this is a way to make the dream more concrete in the session. Could we have the next slide, please? Now, I want to say a word about the structure of dreams before we go on to the next steps. Jung proposed that we look at dreams as having the structure of a dramatic performance, a play, a theater piece. That isn't to say that dreams are like theater, or that they have the clear structure that a theater play would have. Especially classical theater, ancient theater, has a very clear structure to it. So if you go to the theater and you buy the program, it will give you some information about the setting of the play, where this takes place, the time, and so forth. And then who are the actors in the play, who are the characters. It's called the dramatis personae. And then they'll tell you a bit about the acts of the play. In the first act, this happens. In the second act, that happens, and so on. You can read through the narrative of the play before you see the play. And that gives you some added information and prepares you to watch the play. And then there's a climax in the play, where suddenly the pieces fall together, or there's an aha experience, or things take an important turn. And this often happens, it's a high tension point or a high point in the play. And then the play ends shortly after that with a lysis or resolution. So if you look at Shakespeare's plays, for instance, you can see this structure very clearly. The development of the narrative, the action, usually is the bulk of the play. Then it reaches a high point, a climax. Maybe there's a shooting or a death or a revelation, and then a few speeches that conclude the play at the end. That's called the lysis. Now you can apply this structure to the dream report that you get in analysis. That isn't to say that the dream actually takes place like that. If you observe dreams, your own dreams or reports of dreams, they're much more chaotic. They jump around, they go from one place to another. There isn't such a clear structure actually, but it's useful to think about the dream, to apply this model to the dream. It helps you, the dream interpreter, to sort out the pieces and to make it a little more clear in your mind what you're talking about. So the setting of the dream will tell you where the dream takes place, the time of the dream. I was in my grandmother's house. It was when I was about 10 years old. And then who was in the dream? My grandmother was there. My uncle was there. there was a dog or a cat. There are characters in the dream. There was my sister. So on, these are the characters of the dream. So you get the setting, and you have a list of characters in your mind, okay, when you want to get around to interpreting the dream. And then you get a story. What happened in the dream? Well, you know, the dog attacked the cat. The cat scratched my sister. My sister started to cry. My grandmother was upset, and I ran for help. And then the police came, and then so on and so forth. So you get a storyline. That's the narrative. What happened in the dream? What is the story? And sometimes this can be a very long and complicated and detailed story. Sometimes dreams are short, so it's not much of a story, but there is a narrative to it. And then there is a moment where suddenly things change, or the dreamer will say, and then suddenly lightning struck, or suddenly I was somewhere else, or suddenly I understood, suddenly something happened. And that's the climax of the dream. And then the resolution is the ending of the dream. How did the dream end? Now, some dreams are broken. They don't have a lysis. Some dreams break off in the middle of the narrative because the telephone rings or the alarm clock, or something happens in the night and you wake up. So it isn't always as neat as this. But if the dream does not have a resolution, there's something we can do about that. We can continue the dream in active imagination. That's another step of working with dreams. So think about the structure of dreams when you receive a dream in analysis. You don't have to do this formally, but in your own mind, you can think in these terms. You want to be able to answer these questions for yourself. What is the setting? Who's in the dream? What's the story? What happens at the end? Okay, next slide, please. Now you've received the dream. The dream has been reported. You've clarified the details. You have the dream in front of you. It's vivid, and it's on the table between you. What do you do with it? The next step is to establish the context of the dream. And this has to do with gathering associations to the various parts of the dream. You ask, as the analyst, you would ask, what do you, the dreamer, associate to your grandmother's house? There you were in your grandmother's house. What are your associations to your grandmother's house? And then the dreamer will say, that's where we would go during summer holidays. And my grandmother just loved me so much. I felt so good in that place, like in the arms of the great mother. And there were animals around, and it was a part of nature, so on. You gather associations. Sometimes they're positive associations. Sometimes they're very negative associations. My grandmother was a witch. She hated me. She and my mother argued all the time, but we had to go there. So these associations are very important to give you a feeling tone of what's going on in the dream. Clarifying the details or the sensate part. Now you're going to look for the emotional part and the feeling in the dream. What do you associate to your sister? What do you associate to that cat and dog? And you take each piece of the dream and you ask for associations. So this is building a set of emotional reactions, emotional associations to the dream. And that helps give you a feeling for what the dream is embedded in this person's life. This dream comes at a particular moment in this person's life. And what is the emotion, the emotional message in this dream? You want to be able to get a hold of that. Another part of the context is what we call the day residue. And Freud was very keen on day residue, and Jung adopted this also, that the question is, well, was there anything that happened the day before that this dream might be a response to. Oh, I had a telephone call from my sister, and we got into an argument again about some political situation or whatever. The day residue is what happened the day before that might have form a background for this dream. Now, that doesn't mean that the dream is simply a reflection of what happened the day before or a repetition of what happened the day before. But it means that something emotional that happened the day before could have triggered an imaginative response from the unconscious, that the unconscious is constantly responding to what we're doing in our lives. Even though we don't notice it, it's unconscious. But we know from experiments, we know from psychological studies and research that the unconscious is constantly active in our lives, not just when we're dreaming, but also when we're awake. And so that unconscious reaction from the day before the dream can stimulate some activity during the dream time. And the dream is not just replaying that event, but working on it. The dream is a kind of reworking or working through or elaborating on that experience from the day before. So we ask for day residue. Was there anything from the day before? That also adds to the dream context. And then we have what's called the dream series. And Jung was very interested in how an individual dream falls into place in a dream series that stretches out over a longer period of time. Perhaps a dream series could last for several months. Each dream is related to somehow to the series. And if you put the dreams down side by side, and when you have an analytic process going, you can often see this because you have a collection of dreams from the past sessions. You can see that this dream has a place in that series. Now, it may be a repetition of a theme that has been developing in the series, a psychological theme, maybe working with shadow, or experiencing the anima or the animus, or a particular complex, a mother or father complex repeating itself in various dreams. And you can see how from the changes in the dream series, you can see how the unconscious is working on this particular issue. And that this dream falls into that dream series and can show you changes. I do a lot of supervision of cases and also examination of final cases when students come for their final exams to become analysts, and they have to present a case. And in the case write-up, they present a series of dreams that the client has offered during the course of the analysis. And then we look at those dreams in that dream series to see, has something moved and changed in this client's personality during this course of time? And can you show that in the dream series? That the dream series shows an individuation process, a process of development, of change, of working through certain difficult issues, a process of becoming more conscious, of ego strengthening or coming closer to the self or something in that order. So the dream series can be very important matter in establishing the context of a dream. Next slide, please. Now, once you have the personal context from the personal associations, the day residue, and the dream series, the analyst, the Jungian analyst, is trained to expand the context by using the method of amplification, as Jung called it. The method of amplification takes a particular dream image as a symbol, and and relates that symbol to material that is not personal to the dreamer. This may be material from that are material that is similar from history, from mythology, from world religions, from fairy tales, from myths. The Jungian analyst, as a part of training, has to learn quite a lot about the archetypes of the collective unconscious, as we call them. And these archetypes of the collective unconscious are embedded in symbols of the world's mythologies and religions, fairy tales, folk tales, and the imaginative literature of world history. And so the Jungian analyst has a somewhat extended library of symbols in mind while sitting in his or her chair in the analytic sessions. And if a particular dream image looks like an important symbol beyond what the dreamer can understand on a personal level, then the method of amplification will be used. So what is a typical dream symbol? For instance, if a person dreams about a snake, and they have had very little personal experience with snakes. Everybody pretty much is afraid of snakes unless you've been around them a lot, and then you are much more familiar with them, and you might not be as afraid of them. But for people who aren't, and people in the Northern Hemisphere at least, and Europe and North America usually haven't had too much experience with snakes. And so that you dream about a snake, and the snake is doing something in the dream that puzzles you, and you ask yourself, why would I dream about that? What's a snake got to do with anything? And then the analyst will think, well, snakes, let's see. In my understanding of symbols, there's a lot of material about snakes. In the world mythology, in the Bible, there are famous snakes. In the Garden of Eden, there's a snake, represents the voice of the tempter. And if you go to a symbol dictionary and look up the word snake, serpent, you will find pages and pages of material that amplify and tell you about what the people of the world have made of snakes. Some people worship snakes as divine creatures, divinities, or a bird in a dream, or an evil person that you don't know, a shadow figure, a very dark shadow figure who is unknown to you and surprises you, breaks into your house, and so on. The analyst can use the method of amplification to give this dream a much larger context. And this is a kind of mutual association to cultural materials, because when the analyst does that, the client may also have have read something about the dream symbol, know something from a film, a movie, or from a book they've read, or a novel, or stories, fairy tales, myths they heard, Bible if they've learned that, so on. So it becomes a kind of mutual association to cultural materials from the dream, leaving the dream and going out into culture. And this makes the dream bigger. That's why Jung used the word amplification. It enlarges the dream and gives it a much bigger sense of meaning. And so there's building out and coming back to the dream images. So one goes out and collects some amplification material, and then comes back to the dream and asks, how does this apply to this dream and to this dreamer? Because one can get lost in amplifications, and you have to remember you have a client sitting in front of you, and this isn't an academic exercise. You aren't writing a paper or a book. you're trying to understand this person's dream and what it means. So we call this the hermeneutical circle, where you start with a dream, particular image, and you go out to symbolic meanings, and you come back to the dream image again. So you always come back to the dream with the associations. And this amplification remains a part of the dream's context. Next slide, please. And then step 4, we come to interpreting the dream. So far, we haven't done any interpretation. We've used our sensate function to see the dream clearly and the details in the dream. We've collected personal associations and emotional material associated with the dream. We've used our intuition to go out into the field of cultural materials and come back with a treasure trove of archetypal images, and we're now ready to see if they have some significance for this dream. But what about interpreting the dream? Freud's book was called The Interpretation of Dreams. Freud wants to understand, what does the dream mean for the dreamer? And so does Jung. It isn't just appreciating the dreams aesthetically, as Jung said. You want to bring the dream home and see if there's something useful about it for your life. Does it make a difference? Can it add something to your perception of yourself, to your understanding of your personality? Does it add to your consciousness? So Freud had a dream theory, and Jung has a dream theory. You need a theory in order to perform this operation of interpretation. That's what the theory helps you with. Theory is a kind of hypothesis, but a very useful tool for making the interpretation. Now, Freud's dream theory is based on wish fulfillment, that the dream fulfills a wish, an unconscious wish, unconventional and unacceptable wish, and that wish is blocked by the dream censor, and the dream censor recasts the dream in a more favorable, the wish in a more favorable form, and gives you a manifest dream that you can tolerate. But the work of dream interpretation is to undo the dream work and to get a glimpse of what is the unconscious wish that the dream is attempting to fulfill. And it all boils down in Freud mainly to Oedipal wishes, to sexual wishes. So Jung has a different dream theory. And Jung's dream theory is based on an understanding of the relationship of the unconscious to the conscious mind. Jung says that the unconscious and the conscious mind belong to a single personality, and he calls that the self. So this totality of the personality, the self, has two parts. There's a conscious part, we call it ego consciousness, and there's an unconscious part. And the unconscious has levels. It has a personal level, cultural level, collective level, archetypal level. And these two parts of the psyche interact with each other on a continuous basis. What happens in consciousness is that it tends over time to become, quote, what Jung called one-sided. In other words, it develops habits of thinking and perceiving the world, and gets caught up in fixed ruts, fixed patterns of perceiving and hearing and thinking, cognitive patterns, emotional patterns. We get trapped in these habits, that develop naturally in the course of our lives. So starting in childhood, you develop your typology. Maybe you're gifted as a cognitive thinking type, and you are very good in school, and you start relying more and more on your thinking function, and you don't develop the other functions. They're left behind. And so they're what we call the inferior functions. They're in the unconscious. Well, at some point, they play a role in your personality also, but usually a very inferior role. So thinking types aren't very good at dealing with emotions. Feeling types aren't very good at dealing with logical thinking, and so on. So the relation between conscious and unconscious is a very important issue for Jung. And he says what the self intends, what the self wants, and it's a dynamic force, it's moving forward, it's what's behind the individuation process, is it wants to create a complementary relationship, a dialogue between conscious and unconscious, so that the conscious mind doesn't become trapped in its one-sidedness. And the function of dreams as a product of the unconscious is to compensate the one-sidedness of consciousness. So to give consciousness something that it doesn't have, but it needs. That's the idea of compensation. So Jung's theory of of the dreaming mind is that it compensates the waking mind. And this compensation is in the service of creating a dialogue and a balance between these opposites, between conscious and unconscious, so that they don't get too severely divided, because if they're too severely divided, that's the basis of neurosis. And that makes people ill, that makes them neurotic, it makes them have difficulties in their lives. They can't sleep well at night because their unconscious will bother them. And they'll have bad dreams. Bad dreams are a sign that you're not in a good relationship with some feature of life that you need to see in a different way, consciously. So Jung would apply the theory of compensation to the dream and look at the dream as adding something that the dreamer needs, to see the dream as a correction to the conscious attitudes. And that the dream is potentially problem solving. It can bring a resolution to conflicts because it offers something that the one-sided attitude needs and doesn't have. And then Jung also looked at the dreams as prospective. In other words, they're reaching forward. The dream is going ahead. The dream is working out something that the dreamer is going to need in the future. That doesn't mean that the dreams are fortune tellers, that they give you information about what's going to happen in the future, but they can give you some insight into how you need to develop to face your future, how to develop in the future, how to individuate as your life continues into the future. So the dream has individuation potential. So Jung looked on the dreams as very important because they offer us the potential to grow and to approach that goal that individuation is searching for, which is psychological wholeness. Dreams are a part of the program toward psychological wholeness. They are messages from the unconscious that we can use to become more whole individuals. Could we have the next slide, please? And then there's a distinction between objective and subjective interpretation of dreams. If the dream is about people who the dreamer is presently in a current and important relationship with, say a partner, husband, wife, a child, and so on, we tend to look on the dream figures, if those figures appear in the dream, as representing those figures. That doesn't mean that those figures are in the dream. You can't blame your wife or your husband if they do something nasty to you in your dream. They aren't there in your dream. But the dream is telling you something about the relationship or the way you see the relationship. And again, the dream needs to be taken as a compensation to a one-sided conscious attitude. And we could spend a lot of time thinking about that, but we won't, except to say that the dream can reflect on what's going on in your relationships to the world around you and your outer life. On the other hand, the subjective interpretation of the dream tells you something about what's going on in the inner world, in the intrapsychic realm. And if you do a subjective interpretation of a dream, you look at all the figures in the dream as representing aspects of your own personality. Without reference to the outer world, this is telling you something about the relation of your dream ego and ego consciousness to your inner world, to the dream figures as inner figures. So you would work with them as representing complexes. Jung sometimes said, oh, your dream figures are your complexes dressed up as human beings or as animals. So when you take the dream figures as inner figures, representing parts of the inner psyche, we say it's a subjective interpretation of dreams. And the analyst can choose between these two, and sometimes can work them both ways, that a dream can be both reference to the objective world around, outside the person, and to the subjective world on the inside of the person. And so you don't necessarily have to choose between them, but some dreams are much more oriented toward one side or toward the other. Next slide, please. Now, there are what we call big dreams and small dreams. The small dreams are the ones about everyday life, people you know, you're involved with, or places you are familiar with. The big dreams are highly symbolic. They've got archetypal images in them, and you wake up from them and you kind of wonder, what in the world? Why was I going through that process? Now I want to give you an example of a big dream, just to give you an idea of what they look like. Next slide, please. This is a dream of a woman at midlife. She was in her 30s when she had this dream, and she was a bit depressed, and she was beginning to go through a midlife crisis that would involve a divorce and going back to school and becoming a professional later in life. So this is the dream just as she's beginning her second half of life. And she says, I'm walking along a road feeling depressed. Suddenly I stumble on a gravestone and look down to see my own name on it. At first I'm shocked, but then strangely relieved. I find myself trying to get the corpse out of the coffin, but I realize that I am the corpse. It's becoming more and more difficult to hold myself together because there's nothing left to keep the body together anymore. I go through the bottom of the coffin and enter a long, dark tunnel. I continue until I come to a small, very low door. I knock on the door. An extremely old man appears and says, so you have finally come. Quietly, but purposefully, he brings out yards and yards of Egyptian linen and wraps me from head to foot in it, so I look like a mummy. Next slide, please. Inside the cocoon, it's dark. At first, my bones hold together, but later I feel them coming apart. Everything turns liquid. Meanwhile, I see the old man sitting at a window, looking out as the seasons pass. Finally, the old man unwraps the cocoon. There's a wet butterfly. This is me. We go to a large room, and I lie on a circle of light to dry out. The old man tells me that I'm not to think of the past or the future, but just be there and be still. Finally, he leads me to the door and says, when you leave, you can go in all four directions, but you are to live in the middle. Next slide, please. So this is a dream that the dreamer had very little understanding of. She had had some Jungian work. She had read a little bit in Jungian literature, attended some courses. So she wasn't new to Jungian psychology or Jungian work, but the dream came to her as a great surprise, and she brought it into a session that she wanted to discuss her dream. I didn't really work in analysis with her, but she wanted to look at this dream, and I've never forgotten this dream. I've written about it several times in my book, In Midlife, also in the book Transformation, Emergence of the Self. And it's a classic big dream, big symbolic dream, an individuation dream that forecasts her second half of life. At the beginning of the dream, she discovers that she's dead. She's depressed. She finds herself dead. She then goes through a transformation process like a butterfly, like a caterpillar spinning a cocoon, dissolving in the cocoon in the metamorphosis stage, and then coming out of the cocoon, breaking out as a butterfly, drying its wings in the sun and flying away to live its life as a butterfly. So this is a classic middle of life transformation dream. And the figure that she meets in the dream is purely symbolic. It's nobody she knows. He's an old man who lives in this place underground. He's a wise old man figure, a figure of the self, as we say, or Hermes, Mercurius, the transformation symbol of the self. Spirit of the self, as Jung calls Mercurius in alchemy. The dream is compensatory because it relates to her conscious attitude. She didn't know what she was going to do next. She was just at the beginning of this process. So it forecasts, it lays out a process that she will undergo. And it's prospective, it's forward-looking. It forecasts her individuation. Next slide, please. Now, I've given you all the steps that a Jungian analyst will use in asking for dreams, collecting associations, and eventually making an interpretation of a dream, and working with dreams that way in analysis. Now, there are some practical issues and problems. Sometimes the question is, should I ask for dreams in analysis? And I would say, asking for dreams in analysis is inappropriate if the present issues are so traumatic and difficult that to spend time on dreams is not an efficient use of the time one has. One simply needs to hear and reflect on what is going on in the person's life first. And after a few sessions, once the acute issues are settled, one could then ask for dreams. And how often should you ask for dreams? And how much should you press a client for dreams? These are clinical judgments. I never press clients for dreams. I will ask for them occasionally, but if they don't bring in dreams, I will not put pressure on them. And then what to do with frightening dreams. So the dreams, all dreams have a meaning. If it's a frightening dream, it's a compensatory dream. So that's how your dream would deal with nightmares. They are attempts to work through something that is frightening to the person or dangerous, one-sidedness, or sometimes they're repeating a trauma from the past, but they're attempting to work on that trauma. And so receiving the dream is very helpful in helping to resolve the trauma and put it in place. And is it in a matter of interpretation or dialogue? It's a mutual undertaking. In Jungian work, a dream interpretation isn't simply just stated. It arises out of the dialogue that takes place between the client and the analyst. What is the value of dreams, people will ask. Why should I bring dreams? What I say is, well, it can give us some information about you that you don't have access to without them. You're limited as to what you know about your unconscious simply by going inward and introspecting. The dreams will surprise us, and that's their value, that they give us something that we can't reach otherwise. Some people have too many dreams. They flood the sessions with dreams, and then a selection has to be made. What I say is, which dream do you think is the most important? Let's look at that. And then take our time with the dream. There's no point in just rushing through dreams. One needs to spend time on them. in order to get the benefit from them. If there are too few dreams in an analysis, one has to work with a material that simply arises in other ways, through experience, through the transference in the relationship, and so on. And when there are no dreams, the analyst will have to make do without them. It's a limitation. I think a Jungian, a real, true, authentic Jungian analysis includes dreams. An analysis without dreams can be a very effective analysis, a very helpful analysis, but it's not really a Jungian analysis. Next slide, please. And there are ways of working with dreams. What I've outlined to you is the classic Jungian way through the use of dialogue, collecting the materials, working on the dream together, and coming up with a mutually satisfactory interpretation. But then one can also take dreams into active imagination, and that's another step that I won't discuss in this session. But active imagination is a way of dreaming the dream onward, so that can be used further in working with dreams. And then some analysts are prepared to offer a client, even in their offices, the opportunity to paint images or draw images from their dreams. They will have some materials available in their office. Or the analyst can say, well, why don't you try, when you get home, drawing this or painting this, and bring the image back, and we'll take a look at it in our next session. And then there is what's called psychodrama and authentic movement. Psychodrama is working with a psychodrama leader and some other people to create and recreate a dream within a setting, a very closed and trustworthy setting, to replay the dream as a play, as a drama within the context of a group. And authentic movement is taking the dream and, in the presence of an analyst, working on the dream by moving your body freely and engaging the dream through body movement and dance. That's another way of working with dreams. Next slide, please. If you want to do some further readings, there are the works of Jung. There are many places you can go to find dreams. And as I mentioned already, Memories, Dreams, Reflection is full of dreams and Jung's reflection on them. But he also wrote about dreams in the Collected Works, volume 16 and 18. And then Mary Louise von Franz, one of Jung's most brilliant students, wrote a book called The Way of the Dream that can be recommended. Jungian literature is replete with writings on dreams, so I can't give you a list of 50 books here, but these would be sources if you want to read further that are very useful to find out what Jung and the classic Jungian Mary Louise von Franz has to say about the dream and working with dreams in analysis. So thank you very much for your time. I think we can turn the slides off now. And what I can offer you also is, if you have some questions, you can write them out, Lucian or to myself, and I would give you a brief response in writing. I can't do too much of that, but if there's something pressing and you would like to ask a question, I'd be glad to address it. Okay, thank you very much for your time.